It's time for Animal Outlook's Vegan Family Podcast.
Welcome to one of our first interviews with staff here where we're going to get to know each other. This is Rachel Pawelski, and she is our corporate engagement sort of guru here on Animal Outlook staff. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Rachel, about this whole world of corporate engagement, or what I kind of like to think of as supply side work. So, we're thinking about how do we create a vegan world? How do we get rid of factory farming and really shift into something that is a lot more sustainable, compassionate, and just sort of an overall better system? And we think this is a really important way to do it. And, we're among a number of other groups that are doing it, some in kind of different ways than ours, some in similar ways than ours. So what is this? Why do we call it corporate engagement, and what are we doing here?
Yeah, so we, as it's described, engage with corporations, a variety of retail, like for grocery, restaurant chains, whether it's fast food, casual, fine dining. We try to open up conversations with these corporations and influence them to offer more vegan options on their menu, sometimes improve their animal welfare standards. So we meet with these bigger corporations to try and get change that way, so that while we're also making new vegans, when these people who are interested in more compassionate, plant-based, more sustainable options, it's already on the menu for them when they're going to the places that they already visit frequently.
Yeah, I think it's such a smart approach, because I remember way back in the day when we were having a conversation internally about having a campaign to push Subway to have more vegan options, and thinking at the time that it would be amazing, if there was, let's say, vegan meat at Subway, and really having this sort of image in my mind of being in, the rural Midwest somewhere, interested in veganism and animal protection issues, and having no idea, where to eat, or kind of really being able to empathize with that kind of a person and saying, wow, if there was something at Subway, that would be amazing. And it's so funny to think about that, because it hasn't been that long, really since we started that campaign, and we've had some really nice successes with that campaign. But it's really been an avalanche, I think, of companies that have made these products sort of accessible. And I always think about, kind of going back to the Midwest, I always thinking about growing up and my family having to react to my, stopping eating animals, and them saying, well, yeah, the stuff that you make is so good, and the stuff that you bring home from these vegan restaurants is so good. Like, if someone was feeding me all the time, I would just eat this way all the time, right? I mean, you hear people say that all the time. And I think being able to have these tangible impacts on, large restaurant chains, obviously it immediately makes an impact on the animals that are being killed for these products, but it also creates an environment, in a very literal way, where people can be vegan and they can see it and taste it. And I think most of these people eating these vegan options are not even vegan, right? So this might be their kind of way in, or way more in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Just even when I went vegan, probably about a little over 10 years ago now, I remember just the word vegan, people seemed to think it was like this. It was like, you hear that and you're picturing oozing green goo or something. It was just so unappealing. But now you see it in drive-thrus and on fast food, the menus above the registers, and it's become a lot more acceptable, and it's not so scary anymore, just in not that long of a time frame.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about how the kind of work that you're doing here at AO really impacts the cultural perception of the concept of veganism, right? The whole package, just by, for example, offering a vegan burger, for example. I had I'll give you two contrasting stories of my experience. So years ago, I was in Europe, I think Scotland, and the menu was very sort of, old school European food, like a lot of meat and potatoes. And I asked the waitress at this restaurant, do they have anything vegan? And she said, well, what does that mean? And I said, nothing from an animal. She said, okay, nothing from an animal. And then she goes and she's like, what about this? And I'm like, that's beef. Like, that's from a cow. Oh, okay. And then she's like, okay, what about this? And I'm like, that's a fish. A fish is an animal. And you're not even changing. Like, it's literally an animal. Like, oh, like it was dawning on her in the moment that to even think this way. And we went through that. I mean, it was like watching like some like vaudeville act. Like, it was so funny because every time she would give me something and I'd be like, nope. And then, fast forward to last year when Beyond Meat had their Carl's Jr. promotion, and all of us in the vegan world were so excited, and we were, we were sort of coached, okay, you got to go there and ask for it without cheese and without mayo. And I remember going into the restaurant and ordering it, and they were backed up because, there were like so many people. Everybody coming to the drive-thru, I could overhear the drive-thru. Everybody coming through the drive-thru was, making that order. They'd be like, okay, Beyond Burger, no cheese, no mayo. And the drive-thru person kept being like, yeah, vegan. Like, you want a vegan? Yes, I want it. It's like, they were like, come on, you don't have to do this long drawn out thing. Like, we know what you're talking about. It's a totally different world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of tricks of the trade, right, can you offer for people who are interested in getting more vegan options out into the world?
From a corporate engagement standpoint, I would say get involved with the actions that we send out. And I kind of, in my activism, came up with the term to be respectfully relentless. Mm-hmm. So it's important to show these corporations that this isn't a fad that's just going to go away. It's not just a quick trend. The demand is increasing and it's here to stay. So when you're asking for something, don't just ask once and then that be the end of it. Keep showing up, keep contacting via social media, calling, sending emails, letting these companies know that this is something that you're interested in. Your local restaurants might have an opportunity to pitch this up the chain. So just engaging with people in your community and as well as at a national approach, just getting involved however you can and showing that the demand is there and continuing with it until you start to see progress. And especially when you see progress at that point, you don't really want to let up just yet because you want to see this continue and encourage your friends to go out and purchase the vegan option when it's available, show that the demand is there and they should keep it on the menu, and continue not only in the beginning phases when there might not be an option there, but also when there is an option to show your appreciation, to give feedback that this is something that you've been waiting for and that's something that you're going to continue to buy now that it is available.
Yeah, I think I always sort of think about it a little bit as like voting with our dollars, right? Like we want to be able to go, even though I'm not a person who ever had any thought to go to like a Carl's Jr. before, it's now in my orbit, I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's something that I would do. Or, that's probably the case with a number of these fast food places. I remember in high school years ago, this is sort of a segue to the McDonald's thing. We had an open campus for my high school, so we could leave and go get something. But because it was just, the fast food wasteland that we all kind of deal with, right? And I was vegetarian at the time. I would just go to McDonald's and get like a burger without the meat or whatever. And I was like, okay, well, that's like something. And I was like, this is terrible because I'm paying the whole burger price, and now that's all I can do, and it felt always so like sort of icky, like this feeling of like, but then I'm like, well, that's what I can eat for lunch. Otherwise the option was like, go to a sub place and just get it without the meat, So now it's so funny to see this, this big announcement with McDonald's and kind of see all the history of, your work really pushing things in that direction. And just as a milestone of how the world has really changed. So, I mean, do you think everything you just said about kind of being respectfully relentless and really making it clear to somebody like McDonald's who kind of sets the standard for everything, that it's time, like they need to sort of get on this vegan bandwagon? And what do you think about this McDonald's announcement?
Well, I think going back to your point about voting with your dollars, I was listening to an interview recently about right before McDonald's announced that they were offering or trialing the McPlant burger next year. The interviewer, um, I can't remember exactly how it started, but the person that was being interviewed, I think they were a reporter in the food industry, said that if you're in a group of people and there's a restaurant that one person can't get anything at, that negates the whole group, at least in a supportive friend base. If you're all trying to go out to eat, and for example, if you're the only vegan in the group who can't eat at McDonald's, then McDonald's is missing out on not just you, but that entire group. So I think that's a really interesting way to put it, because it's not just your dollars, it's like influencing your friends and making even bigger impacts in that way, which might still seem kind of small when you're just making plans to go somewhere to eat, but it definitely adds up. And I think this McDonald's announcement of trialing a McPlant burger is really, I think, a huge shift. We've seen this buildup of more and more corporations offering plant-based options here and there. And it's now, I feel like this is almost a turning point, because obviously Burger King offering the Impossible Burger is huge in itself, but then we heard a little bit about Impossible potentially courting McDonald's, and then they kind of rescinded the offer, and we later found out that it's because McDonald's is just this Goliath. It's this huge corporation that has so many restaurants everywhere that Impossible realized they couldn't keep up with the demand to supply a restaurant like McDonald's. And we saw the PLT trial in Canada with Beyond Meat, but it wasn't really mentioned whether Beyond Meat would be able to support that kind of supply chain. And I think that's why McDonald's went internally, and now we're hearing rumors that Beyond Meat worked with McDonald's to create this product, but McDonald's keeps saying it's made by McDonald's for McDonald's. And I think that's the only way they could really ensure that they have the supply, is by doing it themselves, because they're such a huge corporation. And I think this is really going to be a big turning point for plant-based eating once this is rolled out in McDonald's nationwide, because it's one of the biggest. There's always a McDonald's, and a lot of the fast food chains that are its competitors are available too. But I think seeing it at such a large scale across the nation will really be that final mainstream push, I think, that we've been anticipating as we watch more and more locations offer, or more and more restaurants offer, plant-based options.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you saying basically is there was a supply chain challenge that was kind of the bottleneck in some of this progress or advancement in the direction of offering a vegan burger. And that seems to be something that McDonald's has overcome. And of course, it's showing that they're seeing that there's something in it for them, basically, to offer these vegan options. So the image in my mind is like, okay, we had all these, burgers coming from mostly, dairy cows, basically. And you're swapping that out for the vegan option. That's so, you think about the staggering number, that McDonald's, as you say, is a Goliath, is kind of in control of, and what the potential there is for really having that be ultimately be a staple of their menu. It's such a big impact potential, and the kind of cascading possibilities elsewhere, right? I mean, if the reasons elsewhere that we haven't seen more proliferation of vegan options is a supply chain issue, maybe this is a model that other companies could use, and kind of borrow the R&D a little bit from, existing work and take it in-house as a branded product like McDonald's is doing. So that's new in and of itself. That's interesting. Nestle created their own vegan burger with vegan cheese, right? And that was something that you were involved in pushing them in that direction too. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we had an investigation at a Nestle supplier, and we're fortunately able to open up a communication, or fortunately able to open up a dialogue with Nestle. And not long after our investigation launched, we saw Nestle roll out the it's a complete burger, right? Which has not been done before. It's the burger, cheese, and bacon, and it's all vegan. And that is being supplied or marketed at the very least more toward like hospitals and schools. You're seeing it on college campuses. And that's really exciting because sometimes in some colleges, you might end up in almost a food desert type of situation, because if it's a remote location and all you have is the dining hall, that's actually what inspired me to get started in like corporate engagement when it comes to vegan options. So seeing a complete option available through Nestle, which is another just major corporation globally, seeing them roll out a complete option like that to these facilities like hospitals, which obviously you want to see health as a priority, and sometimes you don't on the menu for patients, or at schools when maybe the dining services are their only options. Being able to know that you're going to a school that has something vegan on the menu is huge when you're looking at prospective students. And I think that's something that Nestle caught on to pretty quickly in our communication, was that you can be a trailblazer, and it really can be influential in more ways than you realize at first. And of course, you see the demand, so you cater to it. But then once you open that door, you realize, for the schools that are buying it, now they're ranked as having options for vegan incoming students, and the hospitals for patients who may have specific diets. You're kind of seeing it trickle down in ways that you might not have anticipated originally. And that's also really, really profound and exciting to see.
Yeah, I think schools and hospitals really have a lot of potential in terms of creating more opportunities, in those areas. It's always funny to me when I'm at a hospital for whatever reason, and like the person is getting fed, even if they're getting a vegan option, it's so kind of underwhelming that I'm like, well, I could do better if I go to Taco Bell. It's like, go bring them some Taco Bell. Like we have some gaps to close there, I think. And then, the story about your work on Starbucks is a little bit of a different trajectory there. Is that right? Like, it's a little different to kind of be thinking, okay, Starbucks, let's start offering, new vegan options. And they did a lot of sort of fits and starts with a cookie and a sandwich that was, vegetarian but not vegan. And then, where does that stand? And what are your thoughts on how to make a company like Starbucks really kind of be a leader in the plant-based side of things?
Yeah, so Starbucks has always been a unique one to me because, growing up, I always thought like it was where the hip, liberal people, like the very forward-thinking, hung out, and at least in my experience was one of the first to offer soy milk options, definitely ahead of Dunkin. So when they really almost dragged their feet with a substantial vegan food option, it was surprising. Now, of course, they have soy, coconut, and almond milk, so they're catching up. But yeah, we saw the launch of the oatmeal macadamia cranberry cookie. I don't think that was the official name, but we saw that roll out, and then it was kind of taken back. It wasn't very successful, and I have to say, I think it was almost, we were still seeing veganism as like the granola eating hippie from the 90s with a cookie like that. Whereas, you could so easily make a chocolate chip cookie vegan and still make it taste just as delicious. So I think Starbucks, for whatever reason, has a little bit of a learning curve with the plant-based arena. We've seen the rollout of the avocado spread, which is delicious, for the bagel. That's a favorite of mine personally. And then we're really starting to see progress now. I would say in the past few years, we've attended some shareholder meetings, and it's been on their radar, but I think they were focusing more in the drink space. I know for a while, Starbucks actually, a lot of their locations stopped serving food. This was years ago, because they were going more for just a drink space. So I'm not sure if that was really what influenced it. And then they went back to food. But recently, now that we've seen that the one location outside of Seattle is working with Miyoko's vegan cream cheese to offer two different cream cheese offerings there that are vegan, that's monumental. And that same location actually is trying the fully vegan breakfast sandwich. So not even a year ago, we saw a rollout of a plant-based breakfast burger at Starbucks too, and that was so exciting, but it was so short-lived because then we found out not long after that it was prepackaged and frozen with egg and cheese on it. So they were getting there, but again, missed the boat. And when you look at places like Dunkin, the Beyond Meat breakfast sausage sandwich comes with an egg and cheese, but it's not frozen ahead of time, so you can just ask for it without. It's very easy to make it vegan. But Starbucks really seemed to miss the boat with just pre-freezing it to the point where there's no option to make it vegan when you're ordering it. So I think they kind of caught on a little late to that for whatever reason with Starbucks. It's been a bit of a learning curve, like I said, but now that we're seeing this fully vegan breakfast sandwich being tested at that same location outside of Seattle, I do believe that we're very close to a nationwide rollout. At this point, once they've seen that the not fully vegan breakfast sandwich has been successful, even with the cheese and egg, but they're still hearing the demand that, you're close, but it's just not there yet. And we've really seen the progress, right, from the cookie that was like meh to the sandwich that's like, oh, you're close, but you still missed it. And now I think acknowledging Miyoko's and the vegan cream cheese, seeing them partner with a vegan company like that, who Miyoko is, an activist herself. And then potentially there are rumors, but I'm not sure it's confirmed yet, that the sandwich is going to be Beyond Meat and Just Egg. So once you see that they've been aware of these companies now and working to increase their availability, I truly believe that at this point, once that trial is complete, we'll see a nationwide rollout of a fully vegan breakfast sandwich, and it'll be a long time coming for sure.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking about both the Starbucks campaign and the Dunkin campaign that at AO, have been sort of long campaigns, and they have all these, progress milestones. And it's funny to see how the progress in one is sort of playing into the progress in the other. And I think kind of pushing toward what I hope is a much more mainstream kind of set of vegan offerings. Here in Southern California, I don't know if it's all the Starbucks, but a number of them, we have like the acai bowls. And that's a pretty good option as like a vegan meal, obviously plus all the drinks and everything. So hopefully that is just sort of a train that's left the station, and it's not going to be changing direction. We'll just be getting more and more vegan options. So I wanted to sort of change directions a little bit. You talked about the voting with your dollars idea, and the concept that you talked about in terms of one vegan or vegetarian in the group, kind of meaning the whole group goes somewhere else. And I think that's called like the vegan veto. Like I think people have talked about it, in this context of restaurants sort of coming to their senses about this. But I wanted to talk about it in the context of activism, right? Like, so taking off your corporate sort of strategist hat for a minute and look at like, how can people in their individual lives really be effective at this? I mean, certainly they can, as you say, engage in a petition or talk with the social media accounts of these large companies and ask for things. But your story about, if one person can't go, the whole group doesn't go, makes me realize like how much power the individual sort of, conscientious objector basically has in a group like that. And how much education that is for your social networks, right? I mean, like the people who are going with you, if you just sort of quietly decide to eat some French fries and like water or whatever, have the same educational effect, and I think sometimes people are uncomfortable speaking up in a social dynamic like that, or saying, look, I really don't want to go to this place because you all are going to have a good time, but I'm just going to be eating salad or whatever, and dry salad or whatever it is. I think most places now it's not like that. Like you're not just sort of left with dinner rolls and iceberg lettuce or whatever. But yeah, talk about that concept, about like kind of your path to where you are now and how you sort of found that voice, or what you think people can take as how to be effective activist or advocate for animals.
Did you hear that? Sorry, I have the alert for our next meeting. sorry, I got caught up for a second. So like describe my history as an activist?
Yeah, and kind of how you kind of gain confidence to speak up, and also what are the right ways to think about, effective tactics. How can we each, as just people, regardless of whether we work for an animal protection organization or not, how can we be effective at this, and how does that sort of map onto your journey?
Yeah, so I know I've known plenty of people who are a little hesitant to kind of speak up, and I think there's the negative stereotype of a preachy vegan, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think there are much more subtle approaches that you can take that are just as effective. So, for example, if you are with a group of friends and you are the only plant-based eater, it doesn't have to be, oh, they don't have anything for me, can we go somewhere else? You could easily say, this other restaurant has options for all of us. And in that way, you're doing your own activism, because once you go there and your friends see that there are like delicious options that are plant-based, it's not even necessarily putting the one restaurant down. It's just shifting and showing your friend group what else is out there in a more positive light, instead of, saying, I'm only going to be able to eat a water and French fries at this other place. Or you could say, there's not as many options there. I'd love to show you this other restaurant, or this is a personal favorite of mine. I'd love for you to join me here instead. I think there's a lot of opportunity just for families around their own dinner table at home. When I was on the road doing pay-per-view outreach a few years ago, one of my favorite things was when we met college students whose families maybe didn't understand and support. And they were I would always say, your mom isn't trying to oppress you or anything like that. Our parents were taught that meat and dairy are part of a healthy diet, and it's just not true. And now, as we're becoming more aware of that, it's nothing to hold against your family. It's just to kind of teach them that this isn't actually true. And now we're seeing why. Here are some stats. And when you're with your family, if you're still living at home, it's so easy to just do a meatless Monday and say, Mom, I want to cook with you. So you're implementing that like opportunity to get to know your family, to hang out with your mom. What mom doesn't jump at an opportunity to cook with their kid? And just even in simple things like that, where you're not making it a conflict that I can't eat what the rest of the family is eating, just engage and let's all try this tonight. Simple things like that can really just open up a much a polite dialogue that's not as there's no conflict involved, and you're not feeling aggressive or attacked or anything like that. It's just kind of slowly, pushing the dial by pushing it into your own home. And as far as my own activism goes, that's kind of, I would say, how it started. I went vegan in high school, and fortunately, I had a very supportive family. My sister went vegan. Not so I went vegetarian probably sophomore year of high school. My sister is one of the few that I know that actually shifted straight to vegan. It took me probably 2 years, and then I went vegan as well. So fortunately, I've had the supporter base in my family, which I know is not as common for some people. And I think that in itself is a huge what's the word I'm looking for? What's that? When you're when you're racing and the thing that you jump over. Oh, it was a huge hurdle. A huge hurdle that I was able to avoid by having a family that supported me. But especially when I got to college and I had already been around, the vegan environment, my family was supportive. Of course, at that time, there were not like fast food restaurants that were offering vegan options. But I think it came from my background of being so supported that when I got to my college campus and there weren't really options, I was like, why not? At that point, it was just common sense that this is something you could do. And I went to my bachelor's degree is in animal behavior, ecology, and conservation. So that was like basically the perfect in to show my classmates, we love animals. We are animal lovers. There's a way to practice what you preach when you eat, to follow your morals through your diet. So I started a vegan club on campus during my undergrad. And one of our biggest pushes was Meatless Monday. I really wanted to leave knowing that there was a Meatless Monday on campus. At least people knew what the term was. Again, just pushing that dial, of course, opening the door, and then hopefully people see there's more to it. You know, you don't want to just stop at that first step, but that was my goal legacy to leave behind. But fortunately, I met with dining services a lot, and we developed a really great relationship. I still keep in touch with them. And by the time I left campus, there was a fully vegan dining station on our campus, and it was a small private school. So we only had one dining hall overall, and to have a station in there that was fully vegan was monumental. And actually, this was in Buffalo, New York. And at that time, that was the first vegan like dining spot in the city. We've seen a few more restaurants open up now, but at the time it was really groundbreaking, and it was on a college campus, which was also unique. And just developing those relationships on campus with dining services is really what got the ball rolling for me in corporate engagement, but also just within my community, joining or starting this, in my case, starting this veg club, and talking to classmates about, you know, like I said, having my degree was a perfect in, but it's conservation backgrounds. There's so many other backgrounds where you can just add vegan and plant-based eating to the conversation in a more relaxed environment. And you'd be surprised how much change you can make when it's a lot more casual when you're bringing it into the conversation.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because basically what I'm hearing you say is you had a sort of supportive family environment, which allowed you to live in a way that, you know, created a certain amount of confidence, created a certain amount of competence and how to do it. And it just was your lived experience by that time. And you sort of, you know, internalized it so much that you walked out the door to your next, you know, community with a level of empowerment about how to replicate that elsewhere, that then just sort of became the thing you were able to do, right? I mean, I think identifying, oh, these people should care about this because they care about this adjacent issue, is a really powerful thing to you know, kind of realize, and then to start doing along those lines, you know. So I think having that initial kind of, let's say, home base environment where you're like, this is how it's done, makes you the expert to go out and make that happen elsewhere, which is really cool, really interesting. And I do think this idea of community, of having like, okay, we're all in this same undergrad program together because we care about animals, that may mean something about us. You know, there's something about each of us that we have in common, and that it's relevant to this particular issue. That seems very strong to me in terms of the potential to do things. And I've always thought about, you know, we should be, you know, really engaged in the areas of our lives that have these tangential relationships, right? Like, to me, so many vegans that I talk to, myself included, I think, began, let's say, their active work for animals with dog and cat rescue, you know. And I think if there's people who are out there who are really dedicated to, you know, taking care of homeless animals, those are the people who, you know, are already halfway there, as long as they were to have those kind of tools and that kind of conversation and support from the community. So I like your overall theme of, you know, kind of make it positive, you know, make it basically practical, and you're basically feeding people into persuasion. You want them to really understand, which I think is very underrated, but a very important sort of superpower here to get this kind of change happening. And that is a full circle back to this corporate engagement, right? It's like, how do we get this food in front of people where they physically are, you know, and have them start actually eating it and realizing. And you know, the word empowerment gets thrown around all the time, you know, it's kind of like a buzzy word, but I think that's really what this is, right? I mean, it's this idea that, okay, I've lived it. I know I can do it because I'm already doing it. I know what it will really be like because, you know, yeah, I've totally gone to, you know, the fast food restaurant down the street that has vegan options or whatever and eaten them, and they're really good. And I think that, you know, is kind of something that builds on itself, you know, in terms of being effective.
Absolutely.
So what did your parents think? Like, was it a hard thing for your sister to get your parents on board?
No, actually, as I mentioned, I was vegetarian for a few years, and of course, I want to say that was easier. I know for people who are originally switching to vegetarian, it can be challenging, but it was a stepping stone. And so I think they were already aware of the idea. I mean, in my household, I was born an animal lover, as a lot of us are. We
Yeah.
grew up like there's that special connection between children and other animals that I think we can all relate to, but sometimes don't refer back to for whatever reason. So it was no secret that like I grew up loving animals. There were plenty of rescues in my life at various capacities. So the fact that I stopped eating animals was no surprise to anyone. And fortunately, I just grew up in a loving home where they shared my love for animals. We always had dogs growing up. And so I think going vegetarian seemed kind of natural and it wasn't super far-fetched. So they accepted that. And then when we went vegan, my sister and I, honestly, my family was very on board. My mother is now vegan. My dad is a pescatarian. We're working on it. But I'm trying to think. A few years after we went vegan, my sister started a veg fest in my hometown of Buffalo, and it is absolutely a family affair. Like every member of our family is on site that day working. So it's a learning curve for everyone. You're shifting from what you've learned to be healthy, and I think that's where parents get caught up a lot, is if they're not familiar, just worrying about their children getting the nutrients that they need. But in this case, it was definitely very much like my sister and I teaching my parents, instead of, okay, you taught us growing up, but now we're going to teach you what we've learned since then. And yeah, we're very fortunate to have had them both on our side from the get-go. So having that, like you said, that support and that confidence going out into the world really set me up for success, I would say, in being able to effectively influence others.
Yeah, so it's like so sweet, that this is kind of how it turned out. It would be like the end of, a movie about it. Um, as you were talking earlier, and kind of you said something now that reminded me of this. I was thinking about exactly what you said. It's no longer, okay, you're teaching me this as the parent. Now I'm the child who can sort of impart wisdom and teach. And I think it really says a lot about your family that they can sort of take that transition in stride, because I think it's so hard for a lot of parents to see their children, not in that childlike or baby-like way, and as, fully actualized human adults and who might have a different viewpoint, and that viewpoint, might actually be, really compelling and really legitimate. And it sounds like your parents were able to give you that space and think of you that way, and then sort of jumped on board with you, which is such a nice, I mean, it's a metaphor for any kind of growing up transition and sort of that dynamic between parents and kids. But it's really nice that it kind of manifests here in this way, with this kind of really tangible, like you go out and you feed people, and you all kind of do it together. It's like very sweet. So what do you feed people? Like, do you take any of your family traditions and sort of, put them out into the world in terms of actual food?
So at our Veg Fest, we haven't used any family recipes yet. We've done like breakfast pizzas and things like that. But now that we've seen the increase in vegan options across Buffalo, like I said, when it was called Pitchforks, the vegan dining station opened at Canisius, where I went to school. That was the only option. But now with that combined with the Veg Fest, there's multiple options now. So it's really nice to see that we don't have to actually offer vegan food anymore as the creators of Veg Fest. And I'm not a creator. My sister is. I gave myself way too much credit there. She was the one who got it all started. But it's really nice to see that we were able to kind of step back from making food and just focusing on the event. And Buffalo in particular is such a food-focused city. There's like a vegan, there's like a food festival for everything. And actually now we're seeing vegan options in the equation. So like mac and cheese, we saw a vegan restaurant add a vegan option to the contest. There's always a big contest at the mac and cheese festival. They had their own exhibit there, and we're really seeing it just grow exponentially within the past few years. And yeah, we haven't shared as many family recipes. We've kind of kept those to ourselves, but yeah, pretty much everything. Both of my grandmothers were like, I just always remember them cooking, and we've been able to make vegan options of all of the, like pierogi. I come from a Polish background, even a vegan chicken soup, just that growing up, needing that comfort. We've been able to, there actually hasn't been a family recipe that we haven't been able to make vegan, and it's still just as good. It's not like I'm like, oh, it's good that it's vegan, but it's not this. To me, it's that same family recipe. It's just modernized and really brings it back the same feelings and the same taste.
Yeah, that's that sense memory, that feeling of like this was childhood, So learned maybe 2 or 3 months ago that there's a vegetarian Polish cookbook that recently came out. And a lot of it like has like cream and stuff in the recipes, but that's pretty easy to just sub out.
Definitely.
So I'm really excited because one of my grandmas is from Poland too. And it's funny because I realized like I'm of the generation that they really just wanted to assimilate, like they didn't want to keep, like we would call it like Polish sausage. But all of those memories are still there and stuff. So it's nice to, be able to make all that food and, really start like having almost like a file of this is what I like to cook and this is what I want to kind of bring along with me, and be able to be creative and veganize some of those things and, find your beets and your plums and sort of go to town with it. So let's talk about, so obviously you have like such a journey here and such a kind of level of expertise in terms of what you're able to do and what you feel competent doing, and a lot of perspective on this. Like if I were a person listening to this and I was totally new to veganism and it just seemed basically hard, or it seemed like I would feel deprived, or I don't want to deal with people asking me questions about it, or I don't want to feel embarrassed, like what would your advice to those people be?
I would say start gradually. I think people get caught up in like, oh, I've been eating vegan, but I slipped up on one thing because I didn't understand the ingredients, so now I'm not vegan. And it's not about personal purity, at least to me. I think it's just about doing the best that you can, because each person doing the best that they can will create a shift. So when I started, I cut out fish first, then chicken, then beef. And I think because I did it at a slower pace, I was able to learn along the way. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say like, oh, if I couldn't, or I just couldn't live without bacon. If bacon is your one thing, okay, save that for last. And as you're transitioning, research what else is out there, like Light Life, Sweet Earth. They all have vegan bacons now. But if that's what you're getting caught up on or tripped up on, then save that for last. But what helped me was just finding those substitutes. And really, it's not the animal meat itself that you're craving. It's usually the flavors added to it, like salt or like steak. I used to love A1 steak sauce, and I'm pretty sure if that one's not vegan, there are comparable ones that are. So it wasn't even the steak that I loved, it was the sauce. So just being able to make those shifts as you go and just taking your time to learn. Some people can go cold tofu, as they say, straight to vegan, but it's okay if you can't. I would say do what you can and take that time to learn along the way, because if in one day you decide you're just going to cut out everything that you're used to eating, that's going to be very overwhelming. And I wouldn't say that it's the best recipe for success long term. So if you're taking the time to find alternatives to what you like, or even new ones, like people don't always know what to do with tofu because it doesn't taste like any meat that they're used to. And in that case, I would just say, okay, so it's a new food for you. It's not, we're not trying to make it taste like something you're used to, but you're just branching out and trying new things at this point, which can help as well. So like seitan, seitan, you can make a lot of meat alternatives, but maybe tempeh, I wouldn't say it has a consistency that's similar to any other food that I was like brought up on. So that's okay. We're not trying to make it be beef. It's just, okay, now we have another option that's cool on its own. And yeah, not beating yourself up about it, because I think if you put so much pressure on yourself that you're getting overwhelmed and you're not making progress, that's not doing anything for the animals. Just trying your best and learning along the way and sharing with others what you've learned is, I would say, the most lasting impact that you can make. And if you're hesitant to share where you're at, you can always just say, I've been looking into this and I want to try tofu. I've never tried tofu. I'd like to try it. It doesn't always have to be like I'm going vegan and now there's nothing that I can eat at the restaurant you want to go to. Going back to what we said before, there are other ways to just subtly add it to the conversation where the focus isn't on like the change that you're making in the unknown. It's just about new options and opening new doors.
Yeah. I think it's such an important point. Like, it really kind of bears emphasis, like emphasizing that you don't have to be perfect in whatever you're going to define. You're probably putting way more pressure on yourself than anyone else is going to, right? Like, you want to start with the steps that actually make sense, right? Like this point about like, oh, I couldn't give up X food. Okay, give up everything else first. Like, that seems so kind of, clear and like helpful. But I think a lot of people have trouble with that. Like, they don't want to do that because they don't think it's enough. But if you're not doing that, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. But I think for anybody it's a journey for everyone, right? I mean, like, I'm always having new kind of thoughts about veganism and sort of new perspectives about things and stuff. And, I've been vegan for a very long time. So I think your lesson about sort of sharing with people where you are in your journey and also kind of listening to where they are on their journey only can be a positive thing. I mean, like that really applies no matter who you are or where you are on this front. I mean, I feel like people understand, very quickly, like, oh, it's so annoying because I have all this information I just want to give to other people, and how come they're not just doing it, and it requires a little bit of, empathy and kind of grace to give them the patience and the autonomy in the space, but also have the conversation and not kind of avoid the entire conversation. So I think your sort of positive, friendly, practical approach is really, I mean, it sounds like when you hear it, you're like, yeah, of course. Okay. Really profound. It's really important to kind of take that perspective, or you're just going to burn yourself out and, become kind of bitter and isolated for no good reason.
Right. I think a lot of people, once your eyes are open for whatever reason, whether it was a documentary or a pamphlet or however you came about veganism, I feel like a lot of us are suddenly like, I had no idea about this. And now there's still so many people who don't know. And that's where that enthusiasm comes from. And you want the rest of the world to see what you see now. And it can be frustrating if everyone doesn't catch up like at the same time that you do. But I think it's important to remember that you're just learning about this. And maybe a year ago, you didn't know either. And how did you come about this change? Was it someone like yelling at you that we need to make a change, or was it something a little more subtle? And keeping that in mind, because I can absolutely relate to, like, I didn't know for so long, even in my own life. And now I know, and I want to like influence others to change too. But you can, it's just a matter of, like you said, compassion and empathy for your peers, as well as, we're obviously vegan for compassion reasons, and just extending that to your circle as well. And it helps, like you said, otherwise you end up burnt out and kind of disgruntled about like you're in this alone. But if you bring your friends along on the journey in not a forceful way, community is so huge in making changes like this and having the support of others, that if you slowly but surely have the patience and bring them along the way, it's just so much more impactful in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think, I would say the inverse too, right? So there's a reason, it's part of the journey for people to become, kind of polemic and frankly kind of obnoxious, right? In the beginning of this, right? Like, anybody who is coming into an issue that it turns out, are very passionate about, right? Sometimes this is the first issue that really feels like this massive injustice. And I think that makes total sense. So I think we can all sort of see, okay, well, this is a part of that person's journey. They have to kind of be doing that. And I would just hope that non-vegans or people who aren't really kind of understanding of that can kind of think that way a little bit and give people the space to, work out their more aggressive until they find something where they're calibrated to, okay, this is where I want to be. This is what works, and at the end of the day, like being vegan is about sort of a celebration of life and the value of life and kind of this pursuit of happiness kind of concept. And so if your journey is away from those concepts, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
So I think Absolutely. More about finding a way to engage with people and interact with people and sort of be close to people and integrate these values and concepts. And that's what we'll end up with, these really great, 3 a.m. conversations when you're in college or whatever, or the equivalent of that when you're, a middle-aged parent like me and you're having these conversations, in between chasing children around. I think that, having that sense of what we're doing this for is to enhance all life, right? Animal life, human life, and my 7-year-old's always reminding me that humans are animals. So why are we always calling them something else? So yeah, I mean, this is what it's for. It's to make things overall better. And I think coming at it from that point of view is going to allow you to have a much more kind of effective advocacy style.
Absolutely. And when I was doing grassroots outreach, we'd always make a point to say, we're not, because for some reason, some people seem to think that okay, other animals, humans, if you lift this up, it's going to make the humans go down. And that's not the case. We're not devaluing humans by any means. We're just creating a level playing field, for lack of better terms, because in terms of sentience and the ability to feel pain and think and form relationships, other animals are right there with us. So it's not a matter of bringing us down. It's just a matter of bringing everyone else up to create a more level and compassionate environment.
Yeah. And I think we've run into that idea that it's like a zero-sum game so often. And that is like this idea that everybody's on a hierarchy. And that's what we're trying to break down, right? This idea that humans can only be compassionate and helpful to other humans. Then you start opening up this very complicated question of, well, which humans? What are the criteria that qualify you to be treated okay?
Right.
Criteria that qualify you to be treated better than that. So I think, that to me is the wrong road to go down. I think this is about learning about our similarity with animals. I think helps us understand our humanity better and helps us express in a consistent way those sort of more compassionate values. And it enhances everyone, right? So instead of having here or here versus here, I think everybody goes up when you end up, really internalizing some of these ways of thinking. And then you start seeing it everywhere, right? Like these concepts of fairness, okay, how do we, thinking about my background as a lawyer, okay, how do we, resolve disputes? What are grievances that are legitimate and why? What's fair in terms of, resource allocation, like that kind of thing. Is excluded entirely from the conversation and why, and those things do not fall neatly on species lines, not at all. So I think it allows you to think better and in a more consistent way when you start really seeing these issues.
Definitely. At least for me, that was when the floodgates started opening for so many other different issues. And I think other people see another issue first and then veganism comes in after. So there are so many ways that everything kind of overlaps and goes hand in hand with one another. And once whatever door it is that opens it, once you start seeing it, I absolutely agree that it's not bringing one up and the other down. It's lifting everyone up and realizing, where you stand in the world.
Yeah. And I think we'll see, I mean, my personal opinion is we'll see such interesting innovation coming out of the next generation because they can come into a world where veganism is much more normalized. So we'll see, innovation on all fronts, right? Obviously not just technological, but in terms of the culture change and the kind of values around things and how we address, the big questions of kind of society and everything. Let's end this on a little bit of a lighter note. What would you say is the number one thing right now that you're excited about in terms of new vegan food out there?
It's so hard to just pick one. I'm definitely excited for the McPlant at McDonald's just because it isn't, from what I understand, Beyond Meat as we already know it. It's going to be this new category, and McDonald's wants it to be their signature item. McPlant is potentially going to be its own line. So it's not going to just be a vegan burger at McDonald's. It's going to be a McDonald's vegan burger, and seeing those new flavors and, well, not new, but those signature flavors in a new vegan avenue is what I'm most excited about, as well as Starbucks just being able to finally catch up to what we all know their potential is already there, to have a fully vegan breakfast sandwich option. Just these two, McDonald's and Starbucks, I would say, are the two big players that we've been waiting for, and we're so close to finally seeing this come to light. And like you said, with the next generation, when they do have these options readily available to them, that's almost like my own background of having the support right from the get-go, how much further that took me. For the next generation, having that avenue already paved for them, the sky's going to be the limit. So I think, yeah, these two, McDonald's and Starbucks, I would say, seeing what they come out with and how it improves the landscape is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm getting like, this is like the brightest spot of my day, really tying a bow on this whole conversation. It is very much like, veganism has arrived,
Absolutely. Yeah.
From here. Well, thank you so much. It's been really, really nice talking with you.
You too. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in to Animal Outlook's Vegan Family Podcast. Have episode ideas or questions about going vegan? Email us at govegan@triveg.com.